Middle East immigration has been building in recent years, and it has accelerated in the past few months to become a major world crisis. People living in deplorable situations have chosen to spend much of their wealth and risk their lives to cross hostile lands and ford dangerous seas in an effort to reach the safety of European shores. The response to the daily wave of immigrants has not been entirely welcoming. The numbers have overwhelmed the capacity of the target countries to provide for temporary food and shelter needs, much less to absorb the newcomers as permanent residents. Join Harold Hash and his panel the first two Saturdays in December at 10 p.m. to discuss this timely topic. Tune in and hash it out with Harold.
Good evening and welcome to Holiday Roundtable. My name is Howard Hash, and we are here tonight to welcome the holiday season with a second roundtable discussion of one of the year's most compelling issues, Middle East immigration. In round one last week, each of the panelists provided background information related to our subject, and we learned that the lives of each have been profoundly impacted by the phenomenon. Who better to pose questions or suggest possible solutions to the problem? Ali, you've had time to reflect on the events and your role. Do you have some further insights?
Yes, Howard. I recognize that the primary reason for people wanting to leave their homeland is the conflict which daily threatens their way of life, their very lives, and possibly most importantly, their future. The reason for the war, I will leave to academics, who are far more qualified to analyze the underlying social and political issues. But there is one factor which I am certain. The conflict could not exist without the combat participants. Most of these tend to be young men, primarily motivated as I was by the fantasy of fighting for a just cause. I suspect that there is a narrow period in your life when you are most vulnerable to suppressing all other responsibilities and desires to further the goals of a cause. I suspect that this phenomenon can be attributed to factors such as brain development and socialization, but regardless, it is understood by those who are trying to further their own cause. Growing to adulthood, much of my leisure time was spent with video games, television programs, books and movies, many of which promoted violence and glorified war. It was not such a leap to be seduced by the prospect of participating in the conflict to advance a cause which I could relate. The websites, clandestine meetings, the whole process can excite and offer a purpose to life for which prospects were otherwise quite dismal. I was ripe.
Do you see any remedies for this situation?
I am working with an organization with the goal of providing alternatives to those who are vulnerable to combat recruitment. We are hoping to steer young men to other directions where their efforts will be positive for the world. There are existing programs for foreign assistance where their involvement would be welcome, and we are working to develop new programs to tap special talents that could be uncovered amongst this category of young men.
What should we do about the other factors that contributed to your recruitment, such as websites, video games, etc.?
I know that there's an ongoing effort to suppress websites that openly advocate hatred against specific groups and cultures. The effectiveness of such efforts is tied to technological advancements and the willingness to spend the resources required. I am hopeful that in time the authorities will win most of those battles. As regards to video games, TV, books, and movies, there is little that can be done as they do not technically violate any laws. In fact, such violence-based distractions are protected, as they should be, by the principle of free speech. Parental and peer influence is the best way to counteract the impact of these vehicles. Awareness through information provided by alternative sources is probably the most constructive third-party remedy.
In conclusion, Ali, can you provide more insight into your decision to desert ISIS?
The message delivered by our squad leader at our first briefing set the tone for my combat experience. He said, "First of all, I want you to forget all the bullshit that you have been fed about the glory of dying for the cause, ISIS, or even Allah. You are no good to me dead. Your first priority is to stay alive." Waving his AK-47 as he spoke, he was very persuasive. As the days of grinding, fear-filled monotony dragged on, punctuated by the periodic bursts of fierce fighting, I followed his guideline, trusting only in my wits and my comrades to stay alive. I also gained respect for our opponents, who I am sure had the same goal, along with additional motivation, that many of them were fighting for their homes. Ironically, with every death I encountered on either side, I think it reinforced my respect for the sanctity of life. Of course, when we captured our first town, we thought of it as liberation. The arrival of the intelligence squad dramatically changed my perception of the whole effort. There are psychopaths amongst us. By that I mean people who care nothing for others and have no conscience. Clearly the leaders of ISIS had organized the intelligence squads to incite terror in the indigenous population. What we witnessed in that town was no different than the model presented by Nazi death squads in the Second World War. To that group of psychos, it was a video game and the people merely targets. Any organization that would commit such atrocities could not hold my allegiance.
Joining the conversation now is Frank Burrows, who has some significant insights to share on this issue. Frank?
Thank you, Howard. It has been more than 70 years since the world learned the lessons provided by the horrible results of deploying nuclear weapons at Hiroshima and Nagasaki. In those 7 decades, there has never been another nuclear weapon detonated in a populated area. Likely the major reasons have been strict control of access to these weapons, along with the principle of mutual deterrence acting amongst the nations who possess them. We have demonstrated the will and the ability to restrict ourselves in the face of such ominous destructive power. Why is it then that we have continued to conduct conflicts in those 7 decades that have resulted in more deaths than the 2 great wars of the early 20th century? Most of these conflicts have also resulted in major emigrations, as is the case now in the Middle East. Are you not just as dead from a bullet as from radiation exposure? Are we not capable of restricting access to conventional weapons as we are to the nuclear variety? The answer to my last 2 questions is an emphatic yes. As a world community, we must commit to reducing access to conventional military hardware. The first step would be to dramatically reduce production and convert the capacity to peaceful ends. With the infrastructure now in place to guard against terrorism, we should also be able to control the movement of existing armaments. Virtually anything can be detected in transit with current technology. Countries could be sanctioned for willfully providing arms with the goal of extending their influence in other countries. There can be no excuse for providing arms, and there can be no significant conflicts where combatants are armed with spears and clubs, or even swords and bows and arrows. We cannot eliminate problems such as unplanned immigration without disarming the world. In the immortal words of Bob Dylan, we did it in Las Vegas, and we can do it here.
Wow, Frank, why don't you tell us what you really think? I'm convinced, but how will that play at the United Nations? Taking the intensity down a notch or 2, I would like to get more of a perspective on immigrant life.
Okay, Howard, I think I can add some more anecdotal evidence to the mix. I attended many gatherings over the years where my wife's ethnic group represented the vast majority of attendees. Weddings, New Year's parties, picnics stand out as examples. Excuse me. At such gatherings, one can get some sense of what it feels like to function in an environment where you look different, are not comfortable speaking the predominant language, and don't share a common history or customs with the overwhelming majority. The difference is that you wake up the next morning back home. Home for my wife remains the place where she grew up, Palestine. Your earliest memories tend to be the strongest and the longest, although now her favorite team is the Blue Jays.
Jamila is back with us, and we are all eager to hear how you fared after your harrowing experience near the Turkish border. Please proceed.
Thank you, Howard. Upon completing the search and questioning in Turkey, we were sent on buses to the refugee tent camp, which was fairly close to the border. I was assigned to a tent with other single girls and women. The tent was organized, and I was given some housekeeping duties and settled into the camp routine. After a few days, we received a visit from the Turkish official assigned to our tent. She was very pleasant and seemed eager to help. In our private session, she asked a series of questions from a long questionnaire. She became quite interested when I revealed that the only relative of whom I was aware outside of Syria was my mother's brother. I had never met him, as he had immigrated to Canada when I was a very young child. I gave her his name and descriptive information that came from my mother when she talked of him on occasion. The next time we saw our Turkish immigration status officer, she told me that she had planned to take me to a meeting she had arranged for that afternoon. I was surprised and excited that my case would be moving so quickly, as some of the other girls had been there for months. We arrived at an office building with a sign outside that indicated the Canadian consulate was inside. We were welcomed and ushered into a conference room with one of the consulate officials who sat by a telephone. We exchanged pleasantries in Arabic, and the phone rang, which the official quickly answered. After a brief exchange in English, he handed the phone to me and said, "It's for you." I said hello in Arabic, and a man's voice responded, also in Arabic, "Hello, Jamila. This is your Uncle Mohammed." I broke into tears. I was too overcome to explain the events of the past few weeks. He spoke to me as a father would, and explained that the consulate had advised him about the fate of his sister's family and the ordeal that I had suffered. He assured me that the worst was over, and that steps were being taken to have me accepted as a landed immigrant under his sponsorship. He told me to work with the consulate staff to complete the necessary paperwork and have required health screening and shots. He told me that he had been assured that I would be in Canada within 2 weeks. The last thing he said was, "Jamila, your whole family is excited and eagerly awaiting your arrival." After I hung up, the official explained that due to my uncle's sponsorship and the terrible circumstances leading to my refugee status, that my case was being given the highest priority. I couldn't stop crying. The consulate also arranged for a room in a nearby hotel so that I would not have to return to the camp. On the flight, 10 days later, tears filled my eyes the whole way. I had lost everything, and now I had a new life.
Do you have any ideas that you can share with us about remedies for the worsening refugee problem that is unfolding in Europe?
It is difficult to imagine that the number of refugees has increased so dramatically from the time a couple of short years ago when I traveled those same dusty roads. 500,000 is staggering. I can only see it in terms of individuals or at most families, and I understand the anguish of first deciding to leave and then the desperation of looking for a safe haven. I know the expatriate community in Canada is prepared to help in every way possible. The new Canadian government has pledged to accept sizable numbers. I have learned that this is the generosity of Canada, and I can only hope that our example will motivate European countries to do the same, because winter is coming.
Thank you, Jamila. Your story has been both terribly sad and inspiring. We all wish you success in your plans to attend university next fall. I must conclude this holiday roundtable with the realization that we have not identified any significant short-term solutions to the immediate refugee problem. We can only hope that if only out of certain shame, the countries directly involved will formulate some creative solutions. I'm encouraged that we did have some very powerful suggestions to avoid the military conflicts that give rise to mass immigration problems. Hopefully in the future, we will celebrate the holiday season in a world using different ways to resolve conflicts.
As majestic bells of bolts struck shadows in the sounds, and they seemed to be the chimes of freedom flashing, flashing for the warriors whose strength is not to fight, flashing for the refugees on the unarmed road of flight, and for each and every underdog soldier in the night. And we gazed upon the chimes of freedom flashing.